even without that aspect, I think a lot of times we just say it's behavioral, it's behavioral, it's behavioral. Like, this is a training problem, training. And that's not always the case. Actually, in fact, a lot of the time it's not the case. There are very few cases that I run across where it's truly just a training issue. Hey everyone, welcome to the Willing Equine podcast. I really hope you enjoy listening to my thoughts and things I have to share with you. I'll be recording this podcast in my car while I'm driving, so the audio may not be super clear, and sometimes I have my kids with me, so I try and keep them quiet, but if you hear a little bit here and there, I apologize about that. But hopefully you can still enjoy the podcast, and let me know what you think, and feel free to send me voice messages through Anchor or to send me messages through other forms of social media. So I had an experience the other day that I thought I would share with you guys because I thought it was a really great learning experience slash just relatable. I don't know. It was just a really good story to share because it's a very practical application of, and it had a lot of little like inner stories and learning experiences within the larger one. So, but you have to bear with me because this is a story that took place over an entire day. So it's going to take a little bit to get through the whole story, and I'll take little moments to kind of share with you that story that happened, the learning experience that happened in the moment right then. And then at the very end, we'll talk about the entire learning experience and how we can take this and relate it to other aspects of our lives with our horses. So, to set the mood, the image, whatever, I'm not a great storyteller, but I was working, this is particularly centered around my mare, Tiger. So Tiger, for those of you that don't know, she's a beautiful, I think she's about 14 years old now, buckskin and white paint mare, registered paint mare, and she's very quarter horse like built, very stocky and everything. And she's the mare that made a huge shift in my way of working with horses. She was the one that really pushed me to try working with positive reinforcement. She changed everything. So she's my game changer horse. You have a few of those in your lifetime, the ones that just change everything for you, and I'd say she's my second one. So I had one that was a huge game changer for me. They all teach me so much, and they're all make major impacts in your learning experience and how you interact with future horses, and you all of them, and I appreciate all of them for that. But there are just those few horses that just, it's like they're the nail in the coffin kind of situation. Like all the other horses may have made impacts or been leading up to this point, but then you find that horse that's like the horse just forces you to make that change. The horse forces you to look somewhere else, to do something differently. And so she is one of those horses for me. So really the idea behind the Willing Equine and all that, you can thank her for that, because that was the message that she drove home for me, is that it's not enough just to have a horse that's obedient or a horse that wins ribbons or rides under saddle. That I also want the horse to be a willing participant in the training and in our relationship together. So anyway, maybe one day I'll do an entire podcast about her and that journey together. I've talked some about it on Mosey Truitt's podcast, In the Spirit of Horse. I think it's episode 31 if I'm not mistaken, but it has my name on it, and I'm talking with Mosey, and it's called or something about improving your relationship with your horse practically right now without giving up everything else. So that's a great episode to listen to. It's pretty long. It's like an hour or something. But anyway, I'm off on a tangent. So in that podcast, I share a lot about Tiger and I's journey together. So if you want to check that out, go ahead. I encourage you. So Tiger, I have been on this long journey with, and more recently, I have decided to completely ride her completely tackless. I have not put a saddle on her in, I can't even remember how long. It may be as long as almost I think the last time I put a saddle on her was probably spring, so like March, and it's now September, and that was for a photo shoot, and before that I barely was putting it on her, and I don't have anything against saddles. It was just that it was kind of symbolic, the saddle, and then after that I stopped using any halters or bitless and reins, which I'm going to lay this out there and say that even when I ride with reins and a bitless and all of that, I'm still training with positive reinforcement, and I have zero problems with equipment at all, especially if the horse is more comfortable in it. My mare Pumpkin in particular does not like to be ridden bareback. She is very, very upset by the idea. I don't know if it's because it's my bony butt on her back or if she doesn't like her hair ruffled. I don't know, but I use a bareback pad on her or a saddle. She's actually pretty comfortable in a saddle. And Tiger, I also want to put this out there that she has a fully customized saddle, like measured every inch of her. It's adjusted every 6 months kind of thing. So, and I've had multiple people look at her, and so it's not the saddle that doesn't fit her. The saddle does fit her actually, and she does fine in it. I'm still going off on a bunny trail. Anyway, I do ride her in equipment and she does fine, but it was more symbolic of having a saddle, or not even so much a saddle, because you could ride bridleless and have a saddle and that'd be fine. But it was really the halter or the bitless and the reins that, as much as I was training him with positive reinforcement and all of that, it still enabled me to kind of default on some of my old habits of adding, cueing again, or adding a little bit more pressure, or holding the pressure, or holding the cue. Even though I was trying to use just positive reinforcement with it, I was finding myself making mistakes and falling back on old habits. And I also think truly that Tiger had never fully let go of her previous associations with those equipment. So also to fully ensure and to kind of, not test is not the right word, but to put under scrutiny, to really insist upon myself, like this was more about me, that I did not use the equipment in a way that I didn't want to use it, and that I could not fall back on old habits. I decided with her in particular that I wanted to ride completely tackless. So I took everything off and we've just been riding tackless. And we have been doing this for a little while now. It's, a couple months, and just at the walk, practicing our turns, and I use a hand cue and a leg, and I'm transferring it to a leg cue. But I have to be cautious because the leg cue has some past history with it, and it gets confused a little bit sometimes with the acceleration cue, which is a leg squeeze. So I've been mostly relying on right now verbal cues, so whoa, walk on, trot, and then a hand gesture, so left hand out or right hand out for turning. And then eventually I'll add in the tactile cues. So that's been going fantastic. It's been going beautifully. I have never felt more connected, quote unquote, connected with a horse. I've never felt more at peace working with a horse and more excited about the results, like at each little step. I mean, she just turns right one time and I'm just like, my heart is so happy and I just love it. And she's not stressed at all. That was the other problem is when I would use equipment, it was like she would periodically have these moments where she'd have like flashbacks to her past history with that equipment whenever I would use it. So I could never guarantee that she wasn't under mild amounts of stress, distress, particularly when I was using equipment. And none of that has, after the first couple tackless rides, that completely disappeared. And she has been offering for me to get on. She's been, which was something that she would on and off she wouldn't want me to get on sometimes. So that hasn't been a problem. She's been offering for me to get on every single time I ask. She has been very engaged in training. I mean, so much energy. Anyway, it's been so worth it, though very slow going. Anyway, So we've been riding tackless, and this time I took her into the round pen for our session that morning, and we started off on the ground. We practiced our verbal cues from the ground, and then I asked her if I could get on, and she voluntarily positioned up against the fence line, and I got on, and we were practicing then our halts and our walking beautifully. She was doing fantastic, and then I decided that maybe this was the time to ask for a trot, and this would be the first time I've asked her to trot tackless, and it was something that I was waiting for the right moment, because I also had to be in a good place for it, because in our history, she would start trotting and then continue to accelerate, and it was like she would completely check out, that her mind would just kind of leave the building, and then I'm just up there as a passenger, and then she'd start like crow hopping a little bit, and then eventually might turn into full bucking, or rearing, and eventually bolting. So in the very early days, that's what I would experience every time I got on, is that anytime I asked her to walk or move or anything, actually when I first bought her, she could not even walk under saddle, or she could, but she was trained not to. They had just gotten on her and taken off at trots or loping, and so she never really learned how to walk under saddle, so I had to teach her that. And then it was just been a long process of teaching her that walking is okay, be relaxed. And then it was very much became about, okay, now trotting is a relaxed process. It's not a runaway. You're not going to get disciplined for this or that or whatever. I'm not going to pop you in the face. I'm not going to pull you into hyperflexion, which is everything that had been done to her. So just reconditioning, having a rider on at a trot took a really long time, and I feel like the process would have taken way less had I started with where I'm at now. But she's the one that has taught me. She's the one that has pulled away the layers, has peeled back the onion, has refined my skills, taught me so much. She has stripped away every bit of sense of control that I've held on to, little bit at a time. Every time I know whenever something starts to go haywire, I start to look at where I'm trying to control her. And as soon as I get rid of that, like that sense of trying to control her, we're fine. Everything, it just is right as rain. Like, it's just beautiful again. But anytime I try and control, it all goes crazy, and she starts to stress, and then it becomes dangerous, and so on. Well, actually, the dangerous aspect hasn't been present for a very long time, but in the beginning, it was. So this was a huge step for us, a major step, that I was going to ask her to trot verbally only, and be tackless on her. And I can't even explain to you the feeling of when she voluntarily, verbal cue alone, picked up that trot with me on her. And it was the most beautiful trot, and she was stretchy and big and just moving, it was just amazing. I mean, her trot is amazing. But I asked for a whoa, and we had no brakes. So she was we're trotting, and I was excited, and she was excited, and there was no stress from what I could tell. She wasn't rolling her head, she wasn't crow hopping, she wasn't doing anything. But she just lost, the whoa wasn't existing at the trot. So I decided to dismount while she was trotting, and because I knew what would come next, which would be her speeding up, and then possibly her getting distracted or crow hopping or anything that could come. And I say I know that. I don't actually know that that's what was coming next, but I kind of expected it to, just from my learning history of interacting with her. So I didn't want to be afraid. I didn't want anything to happen, so I just kind of slowly dismounted off the side of her, which is great about riding tackless, is that's really just not a big deal. Like, I landed on my feet, just walked next to her. It wasn't a big deal, except for the action kind of startled her a little bit. When I think it would have been fine, except for my foot caught on her back as it was coming off, and it kind of startled her a little bit. Unfortunately, that's not something that I've practiced a lot of, emergency dismounts, so I definitely, so here's learning. So here we already have a bunch of learning experiences. We have one being that if I plan to utilize dismounts while moving. I need to practice that more at the walk first before I attempt to try it at the trot. Obviously, this was a circumstance I wasn't prepared for, and so learning experience for myself. So definitely, if you're listening to this podcast, that's something I recommend to you, especially if you're going to be riding tackless, is practice dismounting first at the standstill, then dismounting at the walk, then dismounting at the trot, and so on, and maybe have a handler and second person on the ground to help keep the horse moving and confident while you dismount. So that's first learning experience. Second learning experience is I probably should have just waited it a little bit longer and I tried the whoa twice, but I think maybe if I had given her a directional cue, like put out my right hand, or I don't even know why I didn't even think of it, I could have just brought out my click. She would have come to a stop if I had clicked, but I wasn't thinking about that. I was starting to get a little bit worried, so my reactions were not exactly as I had hoped they would be, so I could have clicked and brought her to a stop. Thinking back on that in hindsight, that was kind of dumb not to do, but that's one of the beautiful aspects of training with clicker training and positive reinforcement is you have an emergency stop in your pocket, even if you're tackless, and it's a positive experience for the horse. So it doesn't even have to be this thing where you whip around the rein and you pull them up to a stop. It can be a really low stress and positive experience for both of you if you just clicked. Now, technically, yes, I would have been reinforcing her continuing at the trot, even though I'd asked her to stop, but in taking into consideration everything that was happening, that would have been the safer option. So learning experience there. The other learning experience was that maybe having a second person for that first trot transition would have been ideal. I didn't have that option available to me at the time, but I could have waited. I didn't have to do it right then. I could have waited until I had somebody to help me, and then they could have just brought out a target or something like that. So, another learning experience there. And, but, everything was fine. She startled a little bit, but it wasn't a huge deal. Everybody was safe. I spent a lot of time with her afterwards, just clicking and rewarding her for different things. We did something really basic as far as I've been doing some different husbandry behaviors, and we practiced those. We did lots of little standstill stationary behaviors and just recreating that positive, everything's okay, everything is okay. But then I asked her if I could get back on again, because I really wanted that not to be the last time I was on her before she went back. And it wasn't like I was trying to win or prove. I just literally wanted to say, look, it's okay if a human's on you. I didn't want that to be the last experience. And I was just planning on just sitting there and maybe even just asking for a walk, and lots of reinforcement for that, and then getting off, not trying the trot again. And I found it really interesting because I got back up on the fence rail, and she didn't come over. She didn't want me to get back on, which at the time I was really sad about, and took a little bit personally, and thought that maybe I had just really ruined things with her, that I had destroyed that first trot. And I may still have, but it was weird also because she was just standing in the middle of the arena, round pen. She wasn't coming over to me, but she also wasn't going anywhere else, and she wasn't trying to look for food. She was just kind of standing there and looking around, and she wasn't really doing much, which was odd for her. But everything else appeared to be fine. So I just asked her to walk with me a little bit, and then with me on the ground after a few minutes of waiting for her to come over. And she did eventually come over, and I did sit on her for just a second. So I did accomplish what I had wanted to do, and I got off really quickly, and then we walked back to her pasture, and it was really, positive experience walking back, and I put her back, and then she was in her pasture for the rest of the afternoon until the trimmer came. And the trimmer came, and it was late in the evening, so it'd probably been about 4 hours, maybe 5, by the time we got to working with Tiger. And this is where the second part of the day with Tiger happens, and more learning experiences happened. So usually Tiger's pretty good for the trimmer. tie her without food. I can tie her with food. I can just have some food on the ground or up on a stool, or I can just hold her. It doesn't really matter. She's usually pretty good either way. She knows how to stand for the trimmer, and we never have any problems. But this time she was unusually fidgety, especially on the left front, and she was she was just moving around a ton and not able to stabilize, and the trimmer was having a hard time holding the foot, and she kept trying to pull it away. And so it was really challenging. I mean, she got through it, and nothing was wrong. I kept, was trying to encourage Tiger to stand still, and I wasn't punishing her for not standing still, but I was also a little bit like, what on earth is going on? And it would have been an excellent opportunity, or not an excellent, it would have been a very easy opportunity to resort to correcting Tiger from moving or punishing her or saying, you know how to do this, like get with program horse, and getting upset with her. Probably, there was still that inner, like, oh, just stand still, horse. Like, I'm not going to pretend like I'm high and mighty and would have never done that. But I would have, like, even, I would have done that a while ago, but I've gotten a lot better about it and giving the horse the benefit of the doubt and just thinking, okay, now we need to go back and train this some more, whatever. Then we went over to the other front foot, and it was better, but still having trouble. Not as bad as the left front, though. And then we went to the back right. Now, so the back right, and when the trimmer went to pick up her back right, she yanked the foot away really hard. She's never done that before. And the trimmer was like, what was that? And it was really odd because Tiger never does stuff like that ever. And I was like, I don't know. I didn't see it because I was on her left side and this was the back right. And so then she had me try and pick up the back right. And I tried, and it was weird. It was like her stifle was locking, and she was like jerking it, and she didn't appear to be angry or upset or frustrated or anything. She was just not able to hold that or lift up that back right very well. And long story short there, we ended up not messing with her back legs. She was going to come back a different time and do her back legs, but it became obvious of why she couldn't stabilize to hold out her left front, because her back right, which is that diagonal pair, could not stabilize her to have that left front up. She needed to support herself on the left front because she was taking weight off that back right. And then also so the right front was still a problem because, she's just down to only basically 3 legs, and we're trying to take away one of them, so it puts her down to 2 legs. But it made sense why the left front then would be more difficult because it was that diagonal pair. And what was even more interesting is that when I did the emergency dismount from Tiger earlier on that morning, I did it on the left side, and she shied away to the right side away from me. And so now I'm thinking that, and I'm pretty confident that what happened is when she shied away, and it was very short and brief, it wasn't this huge drama, it was just she just did a sudden startle to the right away from me. You know how horses can kind of just like suddenly be to the side. She did that, and then she didn't want me to get back on, and she didn't really want to walk around, and she just stood in the middle of the round pen, but she wasn't limping, and I didn't notice anything at the time, but obviously she had tweaked something really strongly, but it wasn't really stiff yet because I think it was a muscle, and you know how those things can set in over time as they get stiff. She may have pulled something, and then it showed up later when we were trying to do the trims on that back right, and it made sense then that she was having trouble having her feet trimmed. And it's been 2 days now. Let's see, that was on Tuesday, Wednesday. Yeah, so it's been 2 days now since that happened, and she's still very sore, but she's now just able to start picking up that back right and hold it briefly and put it back down. Anyway, so, and I've been, we've been taking care of it. I've got all the medical aspect and the therapy and all that under control. But I thought this was a really good example of how your horse's entire life and every situation they're involved in and every moment that they're involved in impacts the next, and then it impacts the next, and then it impacts the next, and how things that look like training problems or the horses being disobedient or not wanting to do something that we want them to do are often a result not of the horse. Well, never does the horse just do something to be spiteful. That is 100% straight across the board. They just don't have that ability, as far as we know. But even without that aspect, I think a lot of times we just say it's behavioral, it's behavioral, it's behavioral. Like, this is a training problem, training. And that's not always the case. Actually, in fact, a lot of the time it's not the case. There are very few cases that I run across where it's truly just a training issue. And especially if your horse has been able to do it in the past. If you ever feel yourself tempted to say, come on, horse, I know you know how to do this, then there's probably something else going on, because they do know how to do it. Then probably, hopefully your statement is accurate. And then there's another factor that they can't tell us. Like, Tiger couldn't tell me when we were in the round pen and I was asking to get back on her that she hurt herself when she stepped aside. There was no blood, she wasn't limping, whatever, but she was in pain somewhere. It just hadn't set in all the way yet. Like, it wasn't just this acute pain yet. It was just the beginnings. It was just oh crap, that hurt. Like, what did I just do? Kind of more, I think it was more like when you sleep wrong, or when people who throw out their backs, maybe like sometimes it doesn't sink in right away. It takes time, and then it just gets worse, and then it gets stiff, and you're sore, and you're like, oh, like, and especially if you sleep on it, or if you stand around for a while, and then you start to try and move, and it hurts even more then, or the next day it hurts more. It was probably one of those situations, and it just got progressively worse as she wasn't moving, or as we asked her to do more or do other things. So when I talk about not punishing a horse, when I talk about it not being a training issue, when I talk about giving your horse the benefit of the doubt, this is the type of scenario I'm talking about. Her not holding up her left front had nothing to do with the trimmer. It had everything to do with the fact that she couldn't balance herself, and that her back right hurt her terribly. Her not wanting me to get back on had nothing to do with a personal. She wasn't trying to be spiteful. She wasn't just like, well, geez, you did that crazy dismount and now I hate you and this is the end of the world. It was well, shucks. I'm trying to keep it PG. That hurt when you dismounted. I spooked and I hurt myself, and I can't tell you that right now, but something is hurting me, and this is not a personal, it's not personally reflective against something I did. It's not this deep trauma. It was just that, like, something happened, and she needed time, and she needed to rest, and she needed to heal. And her best way of being able to communicate to me that was not coming over, not voluntarily asking or letting me get on. And this is also why it's so valuable to give your horse a choice, and to allow them to say no, and to not force them. Because if I had just looked at this as a training issue, and if it was something where I needed to win and needed to prove to her that, I need to get back on. If I tell you to get on the mounting block, I must get on. If I had gone in with that mentality, I could have done a lot of damage to her. Like, a little tweak could have turned into a major injury. So by giving her choice, by giving her control over the situation, by allowing her to communicate with me that something was wrong, that she didn't want to come over and have me get on, and also by me, even once she did, say, okay, you can come, you get on, like, for whatever it is. I think she was trying to, I'm not exactly sure why she eventually said I could get on. But likely I'm thinking that she kind of processed through what was going on, and maybe it wasn't hurting too bad right then, so she was like, okay, we'll try again. Or maybe she just wanted to trust me and say, okay, I'm a little uncomfortable right now, but I'm gonna trust you. So that's why it would be so important for me to recognize that thing just happened, and just because she came over and said I could get on, that long delay and her saying that I could get on when usually she offers it right away, tells me that I needed to be very, very, very cautious, and I needed to decrease the criteria, my expectations, a lot, and let her communicate and continue to communicate and continue to have a choice, because otherwise I risked doing a lot of damage to her. I probably could have asked her to walk on again. I probably could have asked her to trot again, but I could have damaged her also by doing that, and I could have also made that whole experience a really bad one, because I would have done more harm, and I would have asked her to trot with me while in pain, which would have created a bad association with trotting with a rider and being in pain. So yeah, like this is just a big, long, I experience these kinds of stories and these kinds of learning experiences on a day-to-day basis, and I have a lot of them, but this was just one that happened recently, and I feel like was a really good example and so clear of how damaging the different habits that we have of punishing horses for not listening and saying that we know they know how to do this, just get with the program, and how risky it is to take away control from our horses, and how beneficial it is to give them control, and why we should be working towards this. And also that was the situation where Tiger did come back up to me was a huge display of trust from her in me, that I wasn't going to push her or take advantage of her. And I'm not trying to anthropomorphize the situation, but if trust is a history of positive outcomes in the interaction between the human and the horse, she had enough positive interactions with me and enough trust built up in me from our training and from me giving her choice and from me listening to her and me using positive reinforcement and making it good for her, that she was willing to, despite her discomfort, say, okay, let's try this again. And that's what trust looks like to me. So I can't even express to you, like, that whole day, as much as it sucks that she's in pain now and we're working through it and I'm trying to help her be more comfortable, and I regret not having practiced those emergency dismounts, and I had my mistakes, and this story is riddled with my mistakes. The listening and being patient and giving your horse a choice and not pushing for things and not punishing, this is the epitome. This whole story is what I quote unquote preach. This is what I'm trying to encourage in people. This is my mission. This is what I want to share with the world, is that you can have this relationship with your horse, and that there is more to the story, that it's not just about the horse not standing still for the farrier. And so I really hope that this example and this story resonates with people, and they won't just get hung up on my mistake, and that they will be able to take this home with them and use it with their own horses and give their horses the benefit of the doubt and give their horses more choice and control and a more positive experience, and to reduce the amount of punishment and our expectations of our horses. So yeah, that's my story for the day. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to find out more about The Willing Equine, head to my website, www.thewillingequine.com. On there I have blogs and a very extensive FAQ. I also have other social media through there. So I've got YouTube and Instagram and everything else you could possibly think of. Also, I'd love to hear from you, so feel free to send me a message or an email, and I hope to hear from you soon.